My name is Julian Thorne. I am 34 years old, and I live in Winchester, Hampshire. For the longest time, my world was a tidy, predictable place, much like the charming, cobbled streets of my hometown. I worked as a graphic designer, creating beautiful visuals for clients all over the country from my home office. It was a good life, quiet, fulfilling in its own way, and shared with Sarah. We'd been together for 5 years, living in a cozy 2-bedroom flat just a stone's throw from the cathedral for the past 3. Sarah worked in marketing, a bubbly, energetic woman who had initially swept me off my feet with her vivacious spirit and infectious laugh. We had our routines, our favorite local pub, Sunday walks along the River Itchen, and dreams of one day saving enough for a small cottage with a garden. I truly believed we were building something real, something lasting. She was everything I thought I wanted, and I pictured our future stretching out before us, filled with quiet contentment and shared joys. Our flat, filled with my furniture and her colorful trinkets, felt like a home, a sanctuary we'd built together. But recently, the harmony had begun to fray. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a slow, creeping chill that you only notice when it's already settled deep in your bones. We were going through what she called a rough patch. Looking back, that phrase felt like a convenient umbrella, a vague excuse for the growing distance between us. She was often preoccupied. Her phone seemed glued to her hand more than usual, and our once easy conversations became strained, punctuated by long silences. I'd try to reach out, to bridge the gap, suggesting we talk about things, spend more quality time together, but she'd usually deflect, blaming stress from work or family issues. I told myself it was normal, that every couple had their ups and downs, that we'd navigate through this rough patch just like we had everything else. My empathy, my desire to believe in her, clouded my judgment. I wanted to fix us, to restore the warmth that was slowly seeping out of our shared life. I kept trying, suggesting date nights, offering to cook her favorite meals, anything to bring back the Sarah I knew, the one who looked at me with genuine affection. The problem was, I was trying to solve a problem that she wasn't even acknowledging, not truly. She was simply drifting further and further away, and I was left clutching at invisible threads. Then came the Edinburgh trip. Sarah announced she was going to visit her aunt, who was supposedly unwell, about 600 kilometers away. She'd be gone for a week. I remember feeling a pang of disappointment, as I'd hoped we could use that week to reconnect, but I tried to be understanding. "Of course, darling, your family needs you," ID said, trying to sound supportive, even as a small, unsettling feeling began to settle in my gut. It was nothing concrete, just a vague unease, like a discordant note in an otherwise familiar melody. I wished her a safe journey and watched her pack, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness as she left. A few days into her trip, a work emergency unexpectedly pulled me to Edinburgh. One of my biggest clients had an urgent deadline for a major rebranding project, and their head of marketing, a good friend of mine, specifically requested I come up in person to finalize some critical designs. It was a mad rush, a last-minute flight and a tight schedule. I found myself in the bustling Scottish capital, immersed in work, trying to push thoughts of Sarah and our troubles to the back of my mind. On the third evening, after a particularly grueling day of back-to-back meetings, my client friend, Liam, insisted we grab a celebratory dinner. "You've earned it, Julian," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "There's a fantastic little Italian place just around the corner from your hotel. Best pasta you'll ever have." We walked for a few minutes, turning a corner onto a lively street filled with restaurants and cafes, the evening air filled with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of glasses. As we approached the restaurant's outdoor patio, my gaze drifted across the tables. That's when I saw her. My heart seemed to lurch, a sudden sickening drop in my stomach. It was Sarah. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair catching the soft glow of the patio lights. But she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man, leaning in close, his hand casually resting on her arm. It was Mark, her ex-boyfriend, a guy she'd dated briefly before me, someone she'd always dismissed as a blast from the past whenever his name came up. They looked entirely too comfortable, entirely too happy, and their body language spoke volumes that my mind was struggling to process. My breath hitched. It couldn't be. She was supposed to be with her sick aunt. My mind raced, trying to find an innocent explanation, a logical reason for this impossible sight. Maybe it was a coincidence, a chance encounter, a friend's gathering. But the intimacy of their posture, the way Mark was looking at her, the sheer unbridled joy on her face told a different story. This wasn't a casual catch-up. This was a date. This was a betrayal. A cold, hard knot formed in my chest, a sensation far more profound than mere anger. It was a deep, soul-crushing hurt, a profound sense of foolishness. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had invested was crumbling before my eyes. Liam, noticing my sudden stillness, asked, "Julian, you all right, mate? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just mumbled something incoherent, pulling out my phone, my fingers fumbling. I had to have proof. I had to have something tangible to confirm what my eyes were telling me, to silence the last vestiges of doubt that screamed it must be a mistake. With shaking hands, I snapped a few quick photos, zooming in as much as I dared without drawing attention. The clarity of the images was damning. There was no denying it. Sarah, my Sarah, was here, 600 kilometers from her supposed ill aunt, having the time of her life with her ex-boyfriend. The laughter that had once enchanted me now felt like a cruel mockery. The vivacity that had drawn me to her now seemed like a mask, hiding a deceitful heart. We walked past the restaurant, Liam still none the wiser, and I managed to keep my composure, feigning a sudden migraine. Dinner was a blur. I excused myself early, barely tasting the food, my mind a churning vortex of disbelief, hurt, and a simmering, dangerous anger. I walked back to my hotel, the crisp Edinburgh air doing nothing to clear the suffocating fog in my head. I stared at the photos on my phone, each click a hammer blow to my heart. This wasn't a rough patch. This was a deliberate, calculated deception. She hadn't just stepped out on me. She had lied to my face, concocted a false story about family illness, and flown 600 kilometers to be with another man. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless, yet simultaneously filled with a chilling clarity. The problem was no longer just a failing relationship. It was a profound violation of trust, a deep personal injury that demanded more than just a simple breakup. I was no longer merely unsatisfied with our relationship. I was devastated, my sense of self-worth plummeting. My nemesis had appeared, not as a direct antagonist, but as a deceitful partner, someone who had torn down the very foundation of my life without a second thought. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't simply let this go. The quiet, predictable life I had built for myself had been shattered, and in its place, a cold, hard resolve began to take root. The plane journey back to Winchester was the longest of my life. Each cloud we passed seemed to mock me, each gentle hum of the engines a reminder of the false peace I had been living in. I kept replaying the scene in Edinburgh, the sight of her laughter, the casual intimacy of her ex's hand on her arm. The raw pain was almost unbearable, a searing ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I felt like a fool, utterly and completely blindsided. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? The rough patch suddenly made perfect sense. Every subtle change, every evasive answer, every late night, they all slotted into place, forming a coherent, devastating picture. The anger was a slow burn, not explosive but deep-seated and persistent. It wasn't just about the infidelity. It was about the elaborate lie, the week-long charade, the disrespect. She had walked all over my trust, our shared future, our very home. When I finally unlocked the door to our flat, the familiar scent of her perfume, the sight of her coat draped over a chair, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. This was the place where we had built our life, where I had felt safe and loved. Now it felt tainted, a stage for her ongoing deception. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the books, the little souvenirs from holidays we had taken together. Each item was a reminder of a life I thought was real, but which now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. The immediate impulse was to confront her, to shout, to demand answers, to rip apart the facade the moment she walked through the door. But a colder, more calculating part of my mind, born from the shock and betrayal, held me back. What good would that do? She would deny, deflect, perhaps even try to turn it back on me. No, this required something different, something more deliberate, something that would cut as deeply as her betrayal had cut me. I sat down at my desk, the glow of my monitor reflecting my grim expression. The photos were still on my phone, indisputable proof. I didn't want to make a scene, not yet. I wanted her to feel the consequences, to truly understand the depth of her actions, not just escape with a tearful apology. I needed a plan, something that would allow me to regain control, to reclaim my space, and to ensure that she faced the reality of her choices. I thought about the flat. It was mine. The lease was in my name. I had signed it before we moved in together, a month-to-month agreement requiring 60 days' notice. She was never on the lease, a detail that suddenly felt profoundly significant. My mind, usually focused on creative designs, now shifted gears, becoming a strategic battlefield. The first step was clear: secure my future, and then, only then, expose her past. The next morning, I called my landlord, Mr. Henderson. He was a good man, fair and understanding, a true old-school gentleman who lived in the flat below ours. I told him I needed to discuss my lease, explaining vaguely that my personal circumstances were changing and I needed to consider my options. I hinted at a breakup without going into detail, careful not to implicate Sarah directly, not yet. He was sympathetic, assuring me he would work with me. I then gave him my 60 days' notice, a quiet, almost imperceptible declaration of war. It felt like severing a vital artery, but it was necessary. The countdown had begun. Next, I started looking for a new place. This was a stealth operation. I spent my lunch breaks poring over property listings, discreetly phoning estate agents, and arranging viewings during hours when Sarah was at work. It was exhausting, a clandestine mission woven into the fabric of my daily routine, adding another layer of stress to my already strained nerves. Each viewing was a stark reminder of the home I was losing, not by choice, but by deceit. I found a small but modern one-bedroom flat a few miles away, closer to the city center. It was smaller, but it was mine, a clean slate, a place where I could rebuild. I signed the lease, feeling a strange mix of relief and grim satisfaction. The escape route was secured. The stage was set. When Sarah returned a few days later, she was full of stories about her aunt, her voice chirpy, her demeanor annoyingly cheerful. She even brought me a small, rather generic souvenir from Edinburgh. I listened, my face carefully blank, offering appropriate murmurs of sympathy and interest. Inside, a storm raged, but I kept my calm exterior. The challenge was immense. To live under the same roof as the woman who had shattered my world, to pretend that everything was fine, to engage in the mundane rituals of shared life, all while knowing the truth. The flat felt smaller, suffocating. Every touch, every casual remark from her felt like a fresh wound. I had to create distance, but subtly. I started working longer hours, claiming urgent deadlines, retreating to my office. I found excuses to avoid physical intimacy, citing stress, or simply falling asleep early. She occasionally raised an eyebrow, asked if everything was all right, but I brushed it off, mentioning the rough patch we were still in, a convenient excuse that now served my purpose. I even suggested couples therapy, an ironic twist, framing it as a way to work through things. She demurred, of course, saying she was too busy, which only solidified my resolve. The idea was to keep her guessing, to keep her comfortable enough not to suspect anything major, but uncomfortable enough that she wouldn't question my emotional withdrawal too deeply. The weeks crawled by, each day an exercise in emotional endurance. I became a master of polite detachment. Sarah, for her part, seemed to grow more brazen. Her late nights with friends became more frequent, her excuses thinner. She'd come home smelling faintly of unfamiliar cologne, her hair slightly disheveled. I'd simply say, "All right, darling," and turn over in bed, pretending to be asleep, the bitter taste of her lies coating my tongue. She never questioned my lack of jealousy or suspicion. She probably interpreted it as my disinterest, or perhaps assumed I was as lost in my own rough patch as she was. It was a strange, silent war, fought with veiled glances and carefully chosen words, a psychological chess match where I knew all her moves and she knew none of mine. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, was an unexpected ally. After I had given notice, I cautiously explained more of the situation to him without going into lurid details. I simply said that I needed to end things cleanly and that Sarah was unfortunately not being honest with me and I needed her to move out when I did. He listened patiently, his kind, weathered face showing understanding. "Right then, Julian," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm. "No problem at all. You've been a good tenant. Consider it handled." And he did handle it. When new prospective tenants came to view the flat, Mr. Henderson would coordinate with me. He'd only arrange viewings during the day when Sarah was at work, or on evenings when she was out with friends, or her actual lover, as I now knew. I'd make sure the flat was tidy, ready for inspection, while she remained blissfully unaware that her home was being shown to strangers. It was a dance of deception, a meticulous orchestration of lies and half-truths, and every successful viewing was a small victory, a step closer to my ultimate objective. There were moments, many of them, when the strain became almost unbearable. I'd be sitting across from her at the dinner table, listening to her talk about her day, and I'd have to bite back the furious words, the raw pain that threatened to erupt. Sometimes I'd nearly break. One evening, she came home particularly late, humming a tune I didn't recognize, and she casually mentioned meeting an old friend from university for drinks. The casualness, the blatant disregard for my feelings almost pushed me over the edge. My hand clenched under the table, my knuckles white. I wanted to scream, to shove the photos in her face right then and there. But I held back, picturing the finish line, the moment of truth that was slowly but surely approaching. Each day felt like a week, each week an eternity. I was a ghost in my own home, a silent observer of the life she was leading, a life built on a foundation of lies. The emotional exhaustion was immense, a constant dull ache behind my eyes. I felt isolated, trapped in my secret, unable to confide in my friends without risking prematurely exposing my plan. The thought that she might somehow uncover my scheme, or that my careful orchestration might fall apart, was a constant, gnawing fear. What if she found my new lease agreement? What if a mutual friend accidentally let something slip? What if the landlord, despite his promises, inadvertently revealed something to her? The stakes felt incredibly high. My entire world was riding on this. My heart ached, not just from the betrayal, but from the loneliness of carrying such a heavy burden, of living a double life under my own roof. I was doing everything right, meticulously planning every step, but the waiting, the constant pretense was torture. This was my lowest point, weeks of living a lie, feeling her betrayal every single day, and yet having to act as if everything was normal. All I wanted was for it to be over, for the truth to be out, and for me to reclaim my life. I was certain that all might be lost, that the emotional toll would break me before I reached the end. But the image of her laughing with Mark in Edinburgh, that damning image, was a potent fuel for my resolve. I had to see this through. The morning of the move was shrouded in a pre-dawn stillness, a quiet that felt both heavy and charged with anticipation. I had barely slept, the finality of it all keeping me awake. I had arranged for the removal crew to arrive promptly at 7, just after Sarah usually left for work. It was a risky maneuver, but timing was everything. I had packed my essential items, a few boxes of clothes, books, and personal effects, in the weeks prior, stashing them discreetly in my office, ready to go. The rest of the furniture, all the big pieces, the sofa, the bed, the dining table, the shelves, were mine. I had bought them when I first moved in before Sarah, and they were listed as my property in my personal inventory. She had brought mostly smaller items, decorative pieces, clothes, and her toiletries. The doorbell chimed precisely at 7. I took a deep breath, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Morning, Julian," a gruff voice called through the door. I let the 3 burly removal men in, nodding a quick greeting. They were efficient, professional, and had been pre-briefed by me about the need for a swift, discreet operation. They immediately began systematically dismantling furniture and boxing up items. The flat, usually a haven of quiet domesticity, was suddenly filled with the sounds of tape being ripped, cardboard rustling, and the muffled thuds of furniture being moved. I moved with them, pointing to boxes, directing their efforts, trying to maintain an air of calm authority despite the tremor in my hands. Then Sarah emerged from the bedroom, bleary-eyed and clutching a mug of coffee. She had clearly slept in, a rare occurrence on a weekday. The sounds of the removal crew must have woken her. Her eyes widened, scanning the scene, a look of utter confusion clouding her face. She saw the half-empty living room, the men carrying away the sofa, and a half-packed box of my books. "Julian, what on earth is going on?" Her voice was laced with disbelief, quickly turning to alarm. She looked at me, her gaze demanding an explanation. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of weeks of living a lie, of silent suffering and meticulous planning. I had rehearsed this in my head 1,000 times, every word, every gesture. My face remained impassive, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil that had raged within me for so long. I held up a small, sealed envelope. Inside were the printed copies of the photos I had taken in Edinburgh. "Sarah," I began, my voice quiet, almost eerily calm, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." I walked towards her, placing the envelope in her trembling hand. She looked at it, then back at me, her brow furrowed with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. "What's this? What are you talking about, Julian?" Her voice was thin, a hint of desperation already creeping in. She tore open the envelope, pulling out the glossy prints. Her eyes landed on the first one, her, laughing, with Mark, his hand on her arm. The color drained from her face, leaving her ashen. She flipped through the others, each photo a fresh dagger to her carefully constructed facade. The vibrant life she'd been leading, the deceptive freedom she'd enjoyed, suddenly crashed down around her. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her eyes, wide and panicked, darted between the photos and me, searching for an explanation, a denial, anything to unravel the damning evidence. "Remember your week with your sick aunt in Edinburgh?" I asked, my voice still dangerously calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging behind my eyes. "Funny, I was there too for work. And I saw you, Sarah, not at your aunt's bedside, but enjoying a lovely meal with Mark." Each word was a precise, calculated blow, designed to dismantle her world piece by piece. Her initial shock gave way to a surge of anger, a desperate attempt to deflect. "How dare you? You were spying on me." "This is insane, Julian. This is a complete misunderstanding." She tried to crumple the photos, but her hands were shaking too much. Just then, the front door opened, and Mr. Henderson stepped inside, his presence adding an unexpected layer of authority to the scene. He had obviously timed his arrival perfectly, a silent guardian of justice. Sarah's eyes flicked to him, then back to me, trapped. "No misunderstanding, Sarah," I continued, ignoring her protestations. "This flat, all the furniture, it's mine. I sign the lease, I pay the rent. And I gave Mr. Henderson here 60 days' notice 2 months ago. I've found a new place and I'm moving out today." Her face contorted in disbelief. You gave notice, without telling me. You can't do this, Julian, this is our home." Her voice rose, shrill with panic. Mr. Henderson, ever the gentleman, stepped forward. "I'm afraid, miss," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "that you're not on the lease. Mr. Thorne is the sole tenant. He gave me proper notice, and I have new tenants moving in 2 days from now. The flat needs to be empty and ready for them to start cleaning and refreshing. You have until midnight tonight to get your belongings out. Anything left after that will, I'm afraid, have to be put on the curb." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her shoulders sagged, her face crumbling. The carefully constructed world she had built, based on my trust and her lies, had just imploded. The implications were immediate and devastating. She was homeless, her deception exposed, and her comfortable life was dissolving before her very eyes. Her ex, Mark, was 600 kilometers away, blissfully unaware of the chaos she was in. She had nowhere to go, no one to rely on. She burst into tears, a dramatic, gasping wail that did nothing to move me. The reservoir of empathy I once held for her had long since dried up. "You can't do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? Julian, please," she pleaded, reaching out a hand. I stepped back, my expression unwavering. "You should have thought about that before you decided to lie to me and cheat," I said, my voice flat. The removal men continued their work, oblivious to the emotional drama unfolding around them, simply doing their job with grim efficiency. Sarah, now a frantic mess, stumbled around the flat, desperately trying to salvage what she could. Her cries turned to angry shouts, then to desperate sobs as she realized the scale of her predicament. All the large furniture, the comfortable sofa she'd spent so many evenings on, the bed we had shared, the dining table where we'd eaten countless meals. They were all mine. Her precious decorative trinkets, her overflowing wardrobe, her array of toiletries, suddenly looked pathetic, insignificant. I watched her, a hollow feeling in my chest. There was no triumph, no elation, only a profound sense of closure, tinged with a deep weariness. The pain of the betrayal was still there, but it was now dulled, replaced by the grim satisfaction of having reclaimed my dignity. As the removal men carried out the last of my boxes, leaving her surrounded by a pathetic pile of her own belongings in the center of the now vast and empty living room, I pulled out my phone one last time. She was sitting on her suitcase, her head in her hands, her clothes and toiletries in a disheveled heap around her. It was a picture of utter desolation. I snapped one final photograph, a stark, silent testament to the consequences of her choices. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about drawing a line, about asserting my worth, and about refusing to be walked over. It was about showing her and myself that I wouldn't accept deceit. I walked out of that flat, leaving her amidst the ruins of her lies, and didn't look back. Mr. Henderson gave me a small, approving nod as I left, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done. The flat, once my sanctuary, now felt purged, cleansed of the toxicity that had festered within its walls. The move to my new flat was surprisingly smooth. The smaller space felt liberating, unburdened by the ghosts of a fractured relationship. The first few days were quiet, a strange kind of peace settling over me. There was no longer the constant anxiety of maintaining a facade, no longer the gnawing pain of her lies. It was just me in my own space, a clean slate. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, each item placed with care, as if I was rebuilding not just a home, but my life, piece by piece. I spent evenings rediscovering old hobbies, listening to music I hadn't played in years, simply enjoying the quiet solitude. The healing process was gradual, like the mending of a deep wound. There were moments when the anger would resurface, or the hurt would sting, but they were fleeting, replaced by a growing sense of self-respect. I had protected myself, I had asserted my boundaries, and I had done so with a quiet strength that I hadn't known I possessed. I reconnected with my friends, many of whom had noticed my recent withdrawal. When I finally shared the full story, from the discovery in Edinburgh to the dramatic moving day, they were stunned. My buddy, Liam, who had been with me in Edinburgh, was aghast. "I can't believe I was there and didn't even see it, mate," he exclaimed, shaking his head. The story quickly spread through our mutual circle of friends, becoming a legend in its own right. They hailed my composure, the meticulous planning, the cool execution. It wasn't just a tale of revenge, it became a cautionary tale about respect and a testament to resilience. I didn't revel in it, but I accepted their support, their validation. Their knowing glances and shared understanding helped me feel less alone. Life settled into a new normal, a better normal. My career flourished, unburdened by emotional turmoil. I started going to the gym, meeting new people, slowly rebuilding my social life. My confidence, once rattled, steadily returned. I learned to trust my instincts more, to recognize red flags, to value honesty above all else. The experience, while painful, had undeniably made me stronger, more discerning, and ultimately more fulfilled. I was no longer living for someone else's approval, but for my own sense of peace and integrity. The poetic consequences of her actions were not always as expected, but they were undeniably present. Sarah, as it turned out, didn't fare so well. The story of what happened at the flat, fueled by my friends, awe, and her own desperate attempts to spin a different narrative, quickly circulated. Winchester is not a huge city, and word travels fast. Her professional reputation took a significant hit. Her excuses and denials clashed sharply with the undeniable facts, particularly the visual evidence I had, which, though not widely disseminated by me, was known by enough people to corroborate my side. Her ex, Mark, apparently, didn't want anything to do with her after learning the full extent of her deception and the dramatic exit from the flat. He realized he was just a casual fling, and the mess she created was too much drama for him. He certainly wasn't going to offer her a place to stay 600 kilometers away. I heard snippets of information through the grapevine over the next few months and years. Sarah struggled to find stable accommodation, moving between various temporary lodgings. Her once vibrant social circle dwindled as people grew tired of her endless victim narrative and her attempts to paint me as the villain. Her professional life plateaued as her increasingly erratic behavior and damaged reputation preceded her. The vivacious, charming woman I had once known seemed to wither, consumed by the consequences of her own deceit. Several years later, I was walking through Winchester city center, enjoying a sunny afternoon. I was on my way to meet a wonderful woman I had been dating for a few months, a kind and genuinely honest person who filled my life with a quiet joy. As I turned a corner, I saw Sarah. She was hunched over a small, makeshift stall, selling handmade jewelry that looked rather cheap and poorly crafted. Her clothes were ill-fitting, her hair dull, and the sparkle that once defined her was completely gone. She looked tired, haggard, her eyes scanning the passing crowd with a desperate hope, not the confident, carefree woman I had once loved. Our eyes met across the bustling street. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of recognition, then a flash of shame crossed her face. She quickly averted her gaze, shrinking into herself, trying to become invisible. I simply walked past, my pace unwavering. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of distance, a quiet understanding of how far we had both come. She, spiraling downwards, trapped in the web of her own making, and I, having rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth and self-respect, moving forward into a future filled with genuine happiness. The twist, then, wasn't a sudden dramatic event, but the slow, inevitable unfolding of poetic justice, proving that some actions, indeed, have consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate moment, leaving a quiet, lasting mark on the very fabric of one's life.